Andrey is a developer, which turned into a product manager, so he has this perspective, and he made a quite interesting presentation with the title Using Common Sense to Manage Software Startups. So enjoy the podcast. Hi, here's Florian from 99 Startups, and today I'm here with Andrey.
Hi.
So how are you doing?
Good, doing good. It's a chilly morning in Berlin, and there is no sun, but I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, let's not talk about the weather. So tell us something about yourself. Introduce yourself.
So my name is Andrey Salomatin, and I am a product manager at a company called Productive Mobile. But I have background in engineering, so I have been a software developer for about 7 years. And at some point, I transitioned into a product role because to be honest, because I was from time to time complaining to our senior management about the tasks that we were doing in engineering. I thought that oftentimes we were wasting time or we were not doing something that was really helpful. And senior management solved the problem by, giving me a product role, which helped, at least in the way that I stopped complaining. But that's how I got there.
Then I have already the first question. So did you find out that you have been right, or did you figure also out that like you have been wrong on some a few points you saw?
I have been, yeah, I think what was important for me is communication, and maybe some communication I just wasn't getting as an engineer. And some engineers were absolutely happy with the level of information they got. But I think it's just personally for me, I was missing some insights from sales, from our customers. And that's why I maybe was feeling a little bit, I was feeling that my work is wasted. But once I transitioned into a product, let's just say I have found several issues that we fixed and that I think helped our team be, let's just say, move more directly towards the purpose of the company. And at the same time, I found that certain things that we did were maybe useful, and I just didn't know that because I didn't have the information at the time as an engineer.
Yeah, interesting. So it's like the typical communication, making sure that you are understood in what you say, and
Exactly.
yeah. But I think it's also really important point what you said, that some people are um, are wanting that, and some people are completely fine with just getting the task and just doing the task, and then they don't want to have any more. They just want to be alone and then working on that. Yeah, cool, really cool. So yeah, so you sent me some articles which I will link in our blog article. So tell us a summary about what are the articles about and what are your key points.
Yeah. So mm, let's just say during that year as a product owner and product manager in a software startup, um, in the beginning it was really hard, but then eventually I think I found a set of techniques that kind of allowed me to keep sanity and also to let's just say keep being at least to some extent on top of things. And I'm not claiming that I've figured it all out, but I think I had some learnings that are really helpful for me personally, and that's what I want to, let's just say, write about at the moment. And also i'm I'm looking forward to giving maybe talks at several conferences. And the key, let's just say, the key takeaways is how do you apply this engineering mindset that is very, logical, very methodical, to something like a product role that is oftentimes viewed as, it's mostly communication. I mean, and that's true, but it's also creativity, and just say it's very loose or slightly loose. So and this is what I'm talking about in the articles and in the talks.
Yeah, pretty cool. So one of your key points in the articles was that the idea that like your company or your team or your project, it doesn't matter, it's always a system.
Yeah,
And the system has internally a number of parts and how it works, because there are like several people which work together and so on. But at the end, the only thing which is important is that you give input and you expect the output.
exactly.
And then the only question is how much time it needs or how effective the system is to get the input to output.
Yeah, exactly. And to just give some examples to that, a company or an organization, let's just say Productive Mobile, we do, let's just say B2B software. So we have created a platform that we sell to enterprises. And in our case, the system is the company itself, us, Productive Mobile. Our inputs are basically customers or customer requests, and our outputs are hopefully happy customers. And this process of conversion, let's just say all the details of it, they are important, but they are not defining what we are in a way. Uh, what is our goal is to make sure that customers that use our platform actually achieve results. They're turning into happy customers, so they can recommend us to someone, but also that they're, because we're in enterprise software, that we satisfy requirements that they have internally for themselves. So let me give you a simple example that I actually took from a friend of mine that is doing consultancy. So as a consultant, once they come with a project into a company, they ask the company what kind of metrics, what kind of measurements do they want to improve. And so they measure the success of the project and they measure the success of themselves using metrics set by their customers. So, and I think this is a very good example of a very well set goal. So the system is the consultancy agency, but their inputs are, customer requests, and their outputs are customer requests that are satisfied or customer metrics that are reached. And so the purpose of the system is not defined by who they are, a consultancy agency, but it is defined by the interaction with the world around them. It is defined by their inputs and outputs. So the purpose of this consultancy agency, the goal of this agency is to make sure that customers improve their internal metrics, improve their bottom line often, or another example could be just the level of chaos in the company, or maybe the responsiveness of a certain department.
Yeah. So the goal setting on itself is like similar as important than like the system itself.
Yeah,
So to define and bestly only one goal, because I think several goals could be too complicated.
exactly.
And yeah,
Yeah, I have a story about several goals. And the thing is that when I just transitioned into a product role at Productive Mobile, we kind of implicitly we had two goals, and it was also in our OKRs, and it was there on paper, but we never actually understood that we have two conflicting targets. One of them was to make sure that customers use our product themselves, and the second one was the reality of the day where customers were not using our product, but customer success team, our internal team, was mostly using the product to make sure that customers are successful. And even though on paper we were targeting customers using our product, in reality, our internal team was using the product to serve customers. And as a product, it kind of clashed on me because I had to figure out requests and priorities from both from the top, from senior management, that was basically asking why aren't customers themselves using our product, and at the same time, I had requests coming from our customer success team that were just struggling to serve the volume that they had at the time. And I kind of, for a very long time, I thought that this is my job as a product manager to reconcile those two priorities and to make sure that we find a way that serves both goals at the same time. But if you think about it, as a product person, let's just say you want customers to be successful with our platform, and then you implement something like an onboarding flow, or like a chat system that allows your customers to write directly to you and you can answer their questions and so on and so forth. So if you do those features, customer success team doesn't benefit from it at all. And let's just say in a month or in several weeks, once you have those features, you kind of haven't moved in the direction of, you know, making sure customer success is not in pain at all. And once I had this realization, it became clear that we have two goals, and by moving towards one of them, we are kind of moving away from another one, because whatever we do towards one goal is a waste in relationship to this other goal. And yeah, once I had this realization, it kind of became much simpler and much less stressful for me. So starting from then, I just convinced all the stakeholders, the senior management, and our customer success team to come together to see all the facts on the table and make a decision. Let's just say choose one goal. And at the same time, it was not obvious which one should we prefer. So it was just a matter of, you know, deciding. And we did that, and the results are, I think, pretty remarkable, because in, I think, in 3 or 4 months we have turned around the product to an extent that the new release that we have just released several weeks ago, customer success team, I mean, we decided to focus on the customer success goal in the end. Customer success team was not even waiting until it gets to production. They started using it, I think, weeks before it got to production, and they were super happy with the buggy version that was, you know, crashing from time to time, just because it made them so much more productive in what they did. And right now, once the release is done, and like we are just doing polishing and we are doing tiny features, first customer success is very happy, and they like the time to serve one customer shrinked from several weeks to several days or even hours. So this is one achievement. And the second thing is that because we focused on one team and we focused on serving one customer, which is our internal customer, we now have a much clearer vision how can we bring it to our customers directly without our customer success team. So, I mean, long story short, by focusing on just one goal and making it explicit and making sure that all the stakeholders in the company are aware of that and are, let's just say, accepting that, it made things so much simpler.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. And how you said, like, because stuff gets simpler. If you know what to focus on, decisions are easier to make because you see you want to go there from A to B and you need to do that and that to get there.
Yeah.
And I think it's always also important to define the core value of what you're doing there. And then if you have that, you can just follow it. Because it doesn't make sense if you like build something which can 2 or 3 things, but nothing really good. Like, I don't know, you have a phone, and then like this phone has a kind of okay camera and a kind of okay display and a kind of okay button working. It would be better if you have just one phone with a really, really good camera, the best camera out there, and then you know, okay, this is the purpose for that, and that's like the main strength.
Yeah, absolutely right. And the funny thing is that when I talk to people at conferences or at meetups, and oftentimes when I ask about the goal of the department or of the company, people are struggling to answer. Like, and we've all read the software startup literature, and we all know that it's very important to have a goal and so on and so forth. But still, it's very hard to do that, and it's very hard to, you know, follow up on yourself and making sure that you have this goal, this target.
Yeah, and what I also found really interesting, like you had a part in your article where you said like like it can also happen internally in a company that like just because the sales department has a different goal setting than like the developer department, you get like a difference in the internally in the company.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very common thing as well. So the example that you're talking about is basically internally in the company we have sales department and developers department. It's not my example, but it's an example from a friend of mine. And the 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 trick is that sales department kept putting in features into developers backlog that were ultimately wasteful in a way that um, customers didn't use them, customers actually didn't want them, some customers actively resented them and asked to roll them back. But then why did it happen? What was the problem? The problem was that sales department, the goal of the sales department was quota. So salespeople were incentivized by just selling more contracts. Doesn't matter what they promise, doesn't matter what is in the contract. What matters for them is the quota. Whereas developers were not incentivized by quotas in any way, and they were just a fixed resource. They had a fixed capacity, and because of this misalignment, there was this backlog of wasteful work that engineering had to do instead of doing something useful that was generated by sales. And the thing is that it's not the salespeople that are the problem in this case. It's just the management of the company didn't see this misalignment of incentives. What they did, and it's a very common theme, is that it's very convenient to measure a department locally. It's very convenient to put metrics on a department without any relationship to other departments in the company, because I mean that's how we used to do, and that's how we also kind of as a human, it makes us feel safe and secure, because we know that our work depends only, or let's just say we know that our reward depends only on how we do as an individual or as a small group, rather than thinking about the company as a global thing all the time. So this problem of local optimizations and local metrics is a problem. So imagine if sales works for commission, if developers work based on, let's just say, we measure developers based on the number of tickets they finish, or even worse, those horrible stories where developers are measured by the number of lines of code they write. And then, I don't know, product people are measured and paid according to how much specifications they produce, how much just Confluence pages they generate a month. You can see that it will at some point blow up, because those departments, they're not working towards the same purpose. They're not an organization. They're just a bunch of entities working independently. And this what happened at the company of my friends. And this is what happening with a lot of companies. It's just we accept things the way they are. What we should do instead, for instance, in case of the sales and development departments, we need to make sure that their metrics, however we measure them, is aligned with the goal of the system rather than with the local controlled goal. And what I mean by that is, for instance, for the sales department, we could say, all right, you are measured by the amount of sales generated for projects that customers are happy with. I mean, and this is just an example, right? So sales are measured not just by how much contracts they signed, but how much contracts they signed that, when delivered, made customers happy. And then kind of you force sales to go out of the zone and make sure that that they're working with developers, that they're working with product, that they're more tightly coupled with the customer in talking about requirements, and how would customer feel, like what does it take to make the customer happy. And when you do that, you incentivize them in kind of correct behavior.
Yeah, and it's also interesting, like to even if you work close with the customer to make them happy, to still find out what's the core value your product generates and what are just features.
Exactly. Yes. And for this, again, maybe it's not salesperson's job. I mean, a lot of people would argue that it's not job of a salesperson. But then, if it is not, if I mean, obviously, a salesperson cannot know how much development capacity you have. I mean, that's not their job to know, or salesperson cannot really understand all the like the value proposition that people get from the contract. Although, I mean, arguably, salespeople need to understand that. But if there is a gap, you can always, as a salesperson, go to other departments and figure that out. Let's just say, if you know that there is additional work required by the contract for the customer, you can go to developers and say, hey, how much would it take you approximately? Would it fit your plans, and how does it fit, how does it walk along your capacity? And if there is a problem, then maybe you can together sit down and figure out which contracts maybe can you postpone, or which customers can you reshuffle in priorities in order to get the most useful and the most profitable work done first. But you need to collaborate for that, and you need to work towards the single goal of the whole system.
So
Yeah.
how do you motivate people to work, like to communicate outside their department with each other?
Yeah, so mostly it's just, I mean, one way is to set up metrics in a way that is just impossible to do otherwise. The other way is, I mean, obviously culture comes into play, and just as a manager of the company, making sure that all the leaders of the departments meet from time to time, and making sure that they meet not only in formal environments but also in one-on-one environments is very critical. And also making sure that you communicate this single goal and purpose of the company, because what I find is that once, as a manager, you have set up a very clear expectation of where are we going, how do we know that we got there, and you just let people figure out the details, oftentimes it works. Oftentimes, then all you need to do as a manager is to just make yourself available for consultation, or for making sure that you are there for them. And that's what worked for me.
And that's a really interesting point. So optimal alignment means you set a clear goal and then you let people figure it out on their own. And
Yes.
then
Yeah.
what you also said, like with the non-formal environment, that's also a really interesting point, because like in the podcast with Alan Durick, he was also a big fan of like doing meetings in coffee places and like in non-formal places.
Yes.
So this is also reinforcing this point that like it seems like that if you getting out of the formal surroundings, like people can better, more easier communicate with each other.
Yeah, I cannot really overstate this enough. Something that worked for me personally, and I've actually picked it up from our CEO Anthony, is doing walks with people, doing meetings, walking in the park. This just works wonders, especially if there is a tough situation, um, or there is something that you really genuinely don't know how to solve yet. Just going on a meeting to a park, walking, is incredibly useful. First, you're in an environment where you're not confronting each other across the table. You are walking in parallel. Second, just the whole process of walking and making some parts of your body busy, I guess, makes your mind work in a different way. And yeah, just try it out. I genuinely cannot stress this enough.
Yeah, it's a really cool tip. I can remember that like Steve Jobs was also really big into walking around. Um, yeah, that's a really good tip. Um, so what do you think? Like how what's the most effective way to define the most important core of what you're doing, to define a good goal?
Yeah. So as we talked before, I think the most importantly we need to understand what is our system, and usually you want to make system of a bigger scale, right? So if you are a team lead in a developers department or in a sales department, look at the bigger picture. Look at what the company is doing, and the company is usually a good, a good block that you can reason through. Of course, we can also go down or go low level, but it's better to think, I think, of a company as a system of itself in itself. And then, in order to understand the goal or the purpose of the system, again, we need to look outside of it. We need to look outside of the company to see what is this company generating. What does it take as an input, and what does it produce as an output? Um, Right. So one example, one good example that I also give of a company that has it figured out and that looked outside of themselves is a company called Lambda School. It's a startup in Silicon Valley. And what they do is they teach people to become developers, software developers, and many companies do that. But what Lambda School does differently is they um, they are only getting paid if their customers get jobs as developers. That means that, let's just say, a client comes to them, they take them as a student, and then after some time, once the course is finished, if that person gets a job, then they get paid a certain percentage of their salary on a monthly basis. But if this person doesn't get a job, they don't get paid at all. So I think this is a good example because those guys, instead of charging, for instance, for hours or for lectures, this is how many training companies do, right? We come to your company, we provide you, I don't know, 3 workshops, and each workshop maybe costs, I don't know, 1,000 euros, whatever. And we get paid based on how much time we have spent with you, rather than we get paid for results that you actually get. Uh, Whereas Lambda School, they said, okay, we do training, but it's not our goal. This is not our purpose. Let's look outside of who we are to find, what is our purpose. Let's look outside of us and ask with customers, check with customers what is their purpose. Why are they actually learning to program? And they learn to program to get a job as an engineer. So they made it their goal. And I think this is a very good example of something that is well aligned and also sustainable, because a company that just does trainings and workshops, their revenue is not tied to the quality of those workshops. So yes, you still could have a second metric, which is maybe if people liked the workshop or didn't like the workshop. But at some point, you are at risk to finding yourself in a situation maybe when in an organization everyone liked the workshop, people enjoyed it, but then they went to their workplaces and they didn't change anything. They didn't apply whatever knowledge they got, and the company just didn't get the results they wanted. And if you do that enough times, you would notice that customers are less and less satisfied because you are hired by companies to make them more successful, not just to spend time with them. And I think it's the only way to actually make a sustainable goal is to look outside of the organization.
Yeah, it's a really good example. So, what what do you say? What's the best tip you can give to be a better communicator?
Hmm.
Because you sit it between the chairs, between like management and like the teams. So, what did you figure out? What helped you the most to make your message clear?
Yes. Very good question. One thing I also kind of learned from our CEO is that oftentimes when you disagree with someone or when you cannot get your point across, it's because of the lack of, or let's just say, different levels or different information that you have. Oftentimes, it's not the matter of opinion. And as he says, like the people that are smart people, oftentimes, given the same facts, will come to the same conclusions. And if it's not the case, if you disagree, then oftentimes you have just different facts. And instead of becoming upset about it, or just reiterating your points, it's important to make sure that everyone gets on the same level of facts before. And you can do that using several ways. First, make sure that you put things in writing in front of them, or you draw something in front of them. And make sure that you agree on a definition of a problem or of whatever question you are discussing before. So I think drawing helps. I think writing down stuff on a whiteboard helps tremendously, like just putting bullet points of what you are discussing. And then second thing that is super useful is to make sure that they uh, or for both parties, it's very important to articulate whatever the other party's argument is. So, for instance, if we are arguing about anything, and I have a bunch of facts that I present, it's important to ask then the other party, "Hey, could you just tell me back whatever I told you?" And it's not, let's just say, oftentimes people see it as a negative technique or as an oppressive technique, but it's actually just there to make sure that you understand each other and that you are talking about the same thing. Because oftentimes for instance, I, as a person with a Russian cultural background, would use the same words to express a different thing than a person from a different cultural background would use. So that's very important to make sure that other party reflects back at you whatever you were saying.
Yeah.
Uh, and in product work in general, I think visuals and simple mock-ups or GIFs for specifications also was kind of a very surprising thing for me to discover, that it works much better than oftentimes than specs written in pure text. So that's, I guess, a small tip for product managers. What I do often is I create very simple mockups somewhere in Sketch or in some other program, and then I connect them in InVision, and I click through my prototype and record a short video or like a GIF of how it would work in the future. So, like, that's a very technical tip, but I guess that was an important learning for me in product, is that visuals are so much more expressive than words.
Cool. Yeah, that's a really good point. So at the end, so what's your favorite book? Which book helped you the most?
So in the recent in that year, I guess The Goal by Ellie Goldratt kind
Okay.
of transformed my understanding of how we do work the most. And so we've talked about one part of this, which is goal definition and goal setting. And another big part of this is, once you have set the goal, how do you make sure that the system improves? How do you make sure that the system throughput improves, which means that the system can do more and more work over the same period of time. And this whole idea of theory of constraints, it's let's just say a parallel track to lean. So it started like in the 50s. Taiichi Ono and Toyota, they started with all the lean manufacturing ideas, and they've evolved it to a level of Toyota production system in the 80s. And around the same time, around the 80s, Eli Goldratt wrote his book The Goal, where he described his theory, which is called theory of constraints, which is kind of building upon those lean ideas and applying them to manufacturing. But since then, those ideas went outside of manufacturing. People are now applying it in IT, in startups, and so on and so forth. So another book that I didn't really like the way it's written, but it's kind of on the same topic, and it's about IT. Is called the Phoenix Project, and it's basically about applying theory of constraints in IT.
Okay.
But in general, I find this topic fascinating, and it helped me reason through a lot of things at work. Another, a couple of books. So we talked about communication.
Yeah.
I think there is a very kind of also very basic, very fundamental book that's called Nonviolent Communication. Uh,
Okay.
the author's name escapes me, unfortunately.
I will put it in the description.
Right, but it's exactly that. It's how do you communicate your point across efficiently? How do you make sure that meetings and talking with people personally doesn't become emotional? And when it does become emotional, how do you make sure that you let's just say you keep the dialogue constructive, and even if things get emotional, you get to the bottom of what makes people emotional rather than reacting to it and being, I don't know, aggressive or confused or frustrated. It's basically learning to express yourself, uh, and learning to ask the right questions in order to get the needed inputs from other parties.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
And for product people specifically, I would recommend, Design Sprint, obviously by Google Venture folks, and the Mom Test. This book about how do you interview people to get to make sure that the ideas and the hypotheses that you have are actually valid or false without actually naming your hypothesis, which is a very important point. So without putting your ego at stake, which is painful for both you and the party that you are asking, how do you ask the right questions and still get results? So those are the two on product: Design Sprint and the Mom Test.
Yeah, right. The mom test was the idea that like you don't say that's your product, you say just a friend of mine wants to do that and that.
Kind of, yes.
And then you saw if they come to the same value conclusions you think your product will do or you think you will create.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I forgot that. That was a really cool book. Yes. Cool. So, do you want to have some? Do you want to say something else? Did we miss something?
I think that's kind of it. I guess an important takeaway for me is that oftentimes we kind of in management we act the way everyone acts, or we just accept industry standards. So, for instance, example of a sales department that we talked about, it's just common the sales people live on commission, or an example of uh, training companies or uh, agile consultants that work based on per hour pay instead of working based on results that they bring for their customers. And I guess one of the points that I'm trying to make is that oftentimes those things need to be challenged. And if you feel that something is wrong or something is not exactly right, but you're not put it into words, it's very important to keep thinking about it and try to, let's just say, um, try to make the source of your confusion. And most likely, behind the source of this confusion, there is a real problem, or at least that was my learning over that year in pro.
So you mean learning goes that like if there's is there if there's starting to be trouble, there's normally some reason behind it, and then you should challenge your status quo.
Exactly. Yes.
Cool. Andrey, thank you very much.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, guys. See you next time.